What if the greatest love story of your life started not on a beach, not under falling stars, not with roses, but inside a gray office building, under fluorescent lights, between two people who were never supposed to feel anything for each other beyond a professional handshake? What if the most electric moment you ever experienced wasn't a first kiss, but a first accidental touch of hands reaching for the same file, and both of you frozen, breath stopped, hearts absolutely exploding in silence? What if love didn't announce itself with music, but with a stolen glance across a crowded meeting room that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long? And in those 2 seconds, your entire world quietly rearranged itself. What if the bravest thing two people ever did wasn't climbing mountains, but walking into the same office every single morning, sitting 10 feet apart, pretending to be strangers, while carrying a secret so beautiful it physically hurt to keep it hidden? This is that story. Stay until the last word, because this one will wreck you in the most gorgeous way possible. What if the person who was quietly, completely, and irreversibly changing your life was sitting just 2 desks away from you, and neither of you had said a single word about it yet? Zara Ahmed had been working at Sterling Communications for exactly 2 years, 4 months, and, though she would never admit this out loud, 17 days. She knew the number not because she kept track of her career milestones, but because 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago, Aryan Malik had walked through the glass doors of their 23rd floor office, dropped his laptop bag on the desk directly across from hers, looked up and smiled. Not a spectacular smile, not a movie poster smile, just a quiet, slightly tired, completely genuine smile that somehow reached every corner of his dark eyes. And Zara had looked back down at her screen and thought, this is going to be a problem. She had been absolutely right. Romance X, the accidental touch. What if the universe decided that words were too simple, too safe, too controllable, and chose instead to speak through skin? It was a Tuesday afternoon when it happened, unremarkable in every possible way except for the fact that Zara would replay it 11,000 times in the months that followed. She had reached for the quarterly report sitting on the edge of Aryan's desk at the exact same moment he had reached to hand it to her, and their fingers met, not dramatically, not cinematically, but with the devastating quietness of something real. His hand stilled. Her breath stopped. For exactly 3 seconds that felt like a full human lifetime, neither of them moved, and the air between them became thick with something that had no professional name, no appropriate category, no place on any corporate org chart. When she finally pulled the folder away, her fingers were trembling so slightly that only she could feel it. But his eyes told her he had felt the exact same earthquake, and they both looked away, back to their screens, back to their spreadsheets, back to the performance of being colleagues who felt absolutely nothing, while every nerve ending in both their bodies screamed otherwise. The touch lasted less than 4 seconds. The feeling lasted 4 months and counting, burning quietly, persistently, gloriously, like a fire that had decided it was permanent. Aryan was brilliant in the specific way that quietly confident people are brilliant, not loudly, not performatively, but in the way that made people in meetings slowly stop talking and start listening without fully understanding why. He presented data like he was telling stories. He asked questions that made senior partners pause and reconsider things they had believed for decades. And he made coffee for himself every morning at exactly 9:15 without ever once asking Zara if she wanted some. Except that every single morning, without fail, there was a second cup sitting on her desk when she returned from the morning briefing, exactly the way she liked it, with exactly the right amount of sugar, prepared by someone who had clearly been paying very close attention. She never asked him about the coffee. He never explained it. And somehow that unspoken exchange, repeated every single weekday morning, became the most intimate ritual of her entire adult life. Zara told herself it was nothing. She was excellent at telling herself things. She told herself that the reason she stayed late on nights when Aryan was working late too was because she had deadlines, which was partially true. She told herself that the reason she laughed a little louder at his dry, understated humor in team meetings than was professionally necessary was because he was genuinely funny, which was also partially true. She told herself that the reason she had started caring about what she wore to work after 2 full years of living in the same 3 rotating blazers was because she was simply investing more in her professional image, which was not even slightly true. The truth was quieter and more terrifying than any of her explanations. She had fallen in love with Aryan Malik somewhere between the coffee and the eye contact and the Tuesday when his fingers had stilled over hers, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with something that enormous inside a space that required her to be composed, professional, and completely in control. Romance X, the late night. What if the most romantic place in the world wasn't wasn't Paris or Venice or a candlelit restaurant, but an empty office at 11 p.m. Two people who should have gone home hours ago, with the city glittering 40 floors below them and nothing between them but honesty and time. It was a Thursday in November, during the impossible final stretch of the Hendricks account deadline, when everyone else had long gone home and the office existed in that particular late-night state. Dim, quiet, stripped of its professional armor, almost honest. Zara was staring at a campaign brief that had stopped making sense around the 9th hour. When Arian appeared at her desk with takeout containers, he had quietly ordered without asking because he had noticed she hadn't eaten since morning, which meant he had been watching her with the focused, concerned attention of someone who was doing something far more dangerous than working in the same office. They ate at her desk, shoulders close, talking about the campaign at first, then about their families, then about their fears, then about the strange, beautiful, terrifying feeling of being exactly where you are in your life and having no idea if it is right or completely wrong. And somewhere in that conversation, in that dim office with its glittering city view, the last remaining wall between professional, Arian and real Arian collapsed quietly, and Zara saw him, fully, clearly, vulnerably, and she knew with the certainty of someone stepping off a ledge that she was in love with him in the specific, irreversible way that changes a person's entire internal architecture. And there was no undoing it now. No policy, no professionalism, no amount of extra sugared coffee that could make this into something smaller than what it was. The company had a policy, of course. Most companies did. It lived in a PDF that everyone had signed during onboarding, and approximately no one had read past page 3. And it said something about potential conflicts of interest and maintaining professional boundaries in the careful, bloodless language of people who had never sat in an empty office at 11 p.m. with someone who made the city look more beautiful just by being in the same room as it. Zara read the policy for the first time in November. Then she closed the PDF and thought about the coffee on her desk every morning, and thought about 3 seconds of frozen fingers, and thought about a Thursday night when someone had fed her dinner without being asked and listened to her talk about her mother's garden with the focused attention of someone who was memorizing details he intended to keep. She closed the policy document. She did not open it again. The next morning, Arian's coffee appeared on her desk as usual, and this time, next to his keyboard, there was a small paper note in her handwriting that said simply, "Thank you for Thursday, for all the Thursdays." She had walked back to her desk before he arrived and spent the first 20 minutes of the workday staring at her screen with her heart attempting to escape through her ribs. When she finally looked up, he was reading the note, and then he looked up too. And across the 6 feet and 2 desks and all the professional distance and all the company policy and all the reasonable, sensible, self-protective silence of the past 2 years, 4 months, and however many days, he smiled at her. Not a polite smile, not a professional smile, the other kind, the kind that was meant only for her. Zara looked back at her screen, but she was smiling too, so hard that she had to press her lips together to contain it, and she thought, yes, this is a problem, and I am done trying to solve it. Romance X, the secret glances. What if 2 people could have an entire love story, with tension and longing and declaration and devotion, expressed entirely through eye contact, and no one in a room full of people would ever know it was happening? Conference Room B, 3rd Thursday of November, the Hendricks final presentation, 12 people around the table, the CEO at the head, and Arian standing at the front presenting slides with his characteristic quiet confidence, while Zara sat at the far end, taking notes and trying to behave like a person who was not quietly, completely, totally in love with the man currently speaking. He made a point about consumer behavior that she had helped him research at midnight 2 weeks ago, and without breaking his professional cadence, without moving his face even a fraction, his eyes found hers across the entire length of that table for exactly 1 second. A second that said, "This is ours. This piece of this presentation. This is something we built together." And Zara, looking back at him across 12 colleagues and one very important CEO, wrote something completely unrelated to the presentation in her notebook, pressed her pen too hard into the paper, and thought, "I am so completely destroyed by this person, and I would not reverse a single second of it." No one in that room saw a thing. No policy was violated. No professional line was crossed. And yet, in that single exchanged second, more love was communicated than most people manage in months of actual conversation. Because that is what happens when 2 people have been paying exquisite, devoted, careful attention to each other for longer longer than either of them has been willing to admit. December arrived the way December always does, with deadlines that multiply like problems and holiday parties that everyone pretends to enjoy, and a specific kind of end-of-year emotional softness that makes people brave in ways they aren't during the harder, more defended months. The office holiday party was on a Friday evening. Someone had hung fairy lights along the ceiling of the main floor, which made the whole space look like a different world. Warmer, softer, less like a place where spreadsheets happened, and more like a place where human things could occur. Zara wore a deep burgundy dress that she had purchased 3 weeks ago and told herself was for no particular reason, and spent the first 40 minutes of the party having perfectly normal conversations with perfectly normal colleagues while being aware, with every cell in her body, of exactly where in the room Arian was at all times. He found her by the window at 7:30. The city below them was doing that December thing where all the lights made everything look like a promise kept. They stood close, closer than colleagues, close enough that she could see the small detail of his collar, close enough that if either of them moved a single inch to the left, the world would change. "You wore burgundy," he said. "I did," she said. "I think I know why," he said. She looked up at him. "I think you do too." Romance X, the almost confession. What if the bravest sentence in the English language isn't "I love you," but the half sentence before it, the breathless pause, the moment where someone decides to stop pretending and let the truth out into the open air between two people who are both trembling with the weight of everything they haven't said? Standing at that window with the December city below them and fairy lights above and 12 months of coffee cups and stolen glances and 11 p.m. takeout and fingertips that couldn't forget a 3-second touch, Arian turned fully toward her, not caring in that moment about the room full of colleagues behind them, not thinking about PDFs or policies or professional consequences, and he said, "Zara, I have been," and he paused, and in that pause lived every morning coffee and every conference room glance and every Thursday night and every small, careful act of paying attention, and she looked at him and said, quietly and completely, "I know, me too." And they stood there, facing each other, with the entire story of the last 2 years hanging between them, spoken finally, not in full sentences, but in the most devastating shorthand, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything, because sometimes love doesn't need perfect words. It just needs two people brave enough to stop pretending in the same moment, and they had finally, after all this time, managed to be brave at exactly the same time. They didn't announce anything. Not that night. Not that week. What they did was this. Arian walked Zara to her car at 9 p.m., and at her car door, he asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime. Real coffee, not office coffee, not 11 p.m. takeout coffee, but deliberate Saturday morning coffee with nowhere to be and no spreadsheets between them. And she said yes in the specific way that means yes to all of it. Yes to the coffee and the mornings and the difficulty and the joy and the absolute terrifying, exhilarating realness of what this was becoming. She drove home with her hands steady on the wheel and her heart doing something completely unsteady and beautiful in her chest. And she thought about all the small moments that had assembled themselves into this. The coffee cups, the file folders, the late nights, the glances, the note on a keyboard, a man who had been paying careful attention to her for 2 years and 4 months and however many days. And she thought, this is how it happens, not in grand gestures, in accumulated, faithful, quiet choosing. Romance X, the first real date. What if falling in love in secret made the first public moment together feel like surfacing from deep water, gasping, luminous, finally able to breathe at full capacity? It was a Saturday, an ordinary, unhurried, glorious Saturday. A coffee shop 3 neighborhoods away from their office, chosen with the specific intention of privacy, of being 2 people instead of 2 colleagues, of existing outside the fluorescent lit world where they had been hiding this thing for so long. Arian arrived first and chose a table by the window because he had been paying attention for 2 years and he knew she liked the light. And when Zara walked in wearing something comfortable and unguarded and completely herself, he stood up. Not because protocol required it, but because he wanted to. And they looked at each other in the morning light of a coffee shop with no conference room between them and no performance required. And something in both of them exhaled, deeply, fully, the long-held breath of people who have been pretending for so long that simply being real felt like the most radical, revolutionary, intimate act imaginable. They talked for 4 hours. They talked about everything that the office had made them leave unsaid. And when she laughed at something he said, really laughed, unguarded and completely, without pressing her lips together to contain it. He looked at her with the look of someone who has found exactly where they were always supposed to be, and thought, I would choose this. I would choose this every day. I would choose this for as long as she'll let me. January came. The office came back to life after the holidays, full of new resolutions and fresh deadlines and the specific optimism of a year that hadn't been ruined yet. The fluorescent lights were the same. The conference rooms were the same. The 23rd floor with its city view was exactly the same. But Arian's coffee appeared on Zara's desk at 9:15 as it always had. And this time there was something different. A small folded note underneath the cup that said, "Good morning, Saturday again this week?" And Zara picked up the note and looked across the two desks and the professional distance at the man who had been choosing her quietly, faithfully, in every small possible way for longer than she had been willing to see. And she typed back a single email, subject line blank, body reading only. Yes, always yes. No one in the office knew. The coffee cups kept appearing. The glances kept happening. The late nights kept producing takeout containers and honest conversations. The conference room still had two people in it who could communicate entire paragraphs in a single second of eye contact. The secret kept, warm and safe, and theirs, in the space between two desks on the 23rd floor of a building where spreadsheets happened and policies were written, and absolutely nobody knew that in the middle of all of it, two people had found each other in the most ordinary, extraordinary, quiet, permanent way. And every morning, without fail, the coffee was exactly right. This story is, at its heart, about the extraordinary things that grow in ordinary spaces. Love that does not announce itself with grand gestures, but builds itself faithfully in coffee cups and late nights and 3-second touches and glances that say everything words are too nervous to say. Zara and Arian's story reminds us that the most enduring romances are not the loudest ones, but the most attentive ones, built by two people who decided, quietly and repeatedly, to pay careful, devoted, genuine attention to each other inside a world that constantly demanded they look only at their screens. Their secret was never really about hiding. It was about protecting something tender and true long enough for it to grow strong enough to survive the light. And in the end, that is what all real love requires. Not perfect timing, not perfect words, not the absence of complications, but two people willing to be brave in the same moment, to say me too across all the distance the world puts between them, and to mean it with everything they have. The office stays the same. The people in it are changed, permanently and beautifully, forever.